And so it's sort of like today, where if you're friends with the party in power, you get more rights. You know, hate crime legislation, if you have that ideology. But if you believe in traditional values, guess what? You weren't less equal. And so it's interesting. I spoke at the U.S. Capitol. I did half a dozen congressional staff briefings a year or so ago, and they had congressmen's staffers and so forth. And afterwards, I got a phone call from the Washington Post. And the reporter said, "Are you trying to push Christianity on America?" You know, like having secret meetings in the Capitol. And I said, "Well, can I ask you a question?" I said, "Where did the idea of equality come from?" And the reporter said, "Well, I don't know." I said, "Well, it didn't come from Islam, did it? I mean, in Islam, infidels are not equal to Muslims. Women are not equal to men. It takes two women to testify in court against one man. A woman gets half the inheritance that a man gets. You know, a man can have 4 wives. A woman can't have 4 husbands. Of course, I don't know which woman would want 4 husbands, but nevertheless, there's not equality." I said equality did not come from Hinduism, where they have the caste system, and if you're an untouchable in that lowest caste, you're less than human. You have to take care of the garbage, clean the toilets, live outside of town. You're not equal to the Brahmin. The Brahmin in their divinity. And then in the atheistic belief, if you are useful to the state, you're worth more. In America, you're equal no matter what.
All right, stay there. What comes to mind today, though, is in California, over 1 million state workers and police are above the law. They can't be pulled over. They can't be given tickets. The photo enforcement can't work on them at toll roads and red light cameras because the computers can't read their plates. I'm here Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Central Standard Time. I do an abbreviated syndicated transmission. Sundays, 4 to 6 p.m. And you can catch us on XM on one of their great channels from 5 to 8 p.m. Saturdays. Okay, I wanted to read just the first page of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th. This is in official Homeland Security documents. This pocket constitution is considered terrorist manual. I have video in my film, Road to Tyranny, from a squad car where they find this exact manual that we put free in all our orders, and they find some of my videos, and they arrest her for this. It's the police on tape finding this and getting scared. Now, they've sworn an oath to this, but they're so brainwashed, they get scared. Now, not all police are this dumb, but the general public overall has been dumbed down. In Congress on July 4th, 1776, this is what America's about, folks. Not about football or mom and apple pie. It's about this. The unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitles them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the cause which impels them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, that's us, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light or transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, what's happening today, pursuing inevitably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism. Just goes on and on. They're setting up tyranny scientifically to suppress us and lie and cheat and steal the votes. It is their right, it is their duty to overthrow and to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security, Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. To history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let the facts be submitted to a candid world. And then it goes over the tyrannies that have been set up. And you look at these tyrannies, it's exactly what's being done today, but even worse today. Okay, I'm going to sit back now because I want to take a few calls in a few minutes. But Bill, try to go over historically what the founders did, how they were persecuted for putting their John Hancocks on that Declaration of Independence 230 plus years ago tomorrow.
Well, a little background, the French and Indian War took place, 1754 to 1763, and the British won and decided to keep troops in America and make the Americans pay for these troops. Well, they didn't have barracks, and so they would simply come up to your house and say, guess what, we're going to have the troops stay in your house, you live in the attic or the barn. And so they began to pass taxes, the sugar tax, the currency act, the stamp tax, the quartering act, and all these, and the colonies had no representation in Parliament. And so it was taxation without representation. And so that's when we had the Boston Tea Party and so forth, and the British responded by blockading Boston Harbor, and then there was the Battle of Bunker Hill. Thomas Jefferson over in Virginia promotes a day of fasting and prayer in the Virginia legislature. And the royal governor takes this as an insult to the king and disbands the Virginia legislature, the House of Burgesses. And so that's when they set up a Continental Congress. And the first act, of course, of the Continental Congress was to open with prayer. It's interesting how they're trying to outlaw that today. But then Washington was put in command there at Boston. He had 26-year-old Henry Knox go up to Fort Ticonderoga and bring down a bunch of cannons. And they put straw on the wheels so they could put them in place without making any noise. And the Dorchester Heights, the next day, the British wake up, see these cannons staring down their throat. And so the British evacuate Boston. It's a great rejoicing. And the British are going to New York. And so George Washington goes to New York. He has 20,000 volunteers. The Declaration is written, and he has it read to his troops. There's great enthusiasm. But the British fill up the harbor. 400 ships in the New York harbor. They say it was just looked like a forest full of trees because all the masts. And then the British begin to pound away, and Washington's men freak out and start fleeing. He's trying to rally them back. They have to drag Washington from the field because he doesn't want to leave. But his troops retreat across Manhattan, retreat across New York, retreat across New Jersey, and retreat across the Delaware River into Pennsylvania. Within 6 months, Washington's troops dwindle from 20,000 down to 2,000. The Continental Congress sends him his last order up to that point that says, until further notice, you're in charge of America. And the Continental Congress packs up shop and leaves. And here's Washington. It's all resting upon him, and his men had only volunteered for 6 months. So July to December, guess what? He had 1 week before they were all going to leave, and Washington proves his worth. He orders an attack Christmas Day evening, surprises the German Hessians and captures 1,000 of them. 10 days later, wins the Battle of Princeton, and this begins the turn in the course of the war. But it's interesting. They voted for independence on July 2nd, and that's the day that John Adams thought was going to be celebrated with bonfires and illuminations and solemn acts of devotion to Almighty God. That's when they voted for it. On July 4th, only 2 people signed. John Hancock, the president of the Continental Congress, he signed very large and said, now the King of England can read my signature without using his spectacles, his glasses, and he said, the price on my head is just doubled. And so that's where it gave him the phrase, put your John Hancock here, you know. And then Charles Thompson, the secretary of the Continental Congress. The rest didn't sign until August 2nd when they had an engrossed copy. And really, a third of them didn't sign until 6 months later. They had to come back to Philadelphia just to sign it. And they weren't in a big hurry because they knew they were signing their death warrant. The sun never set on the British Empire. It was the most powerful empire in the world. They had the American colonies, Canada. They had Jamaica and British Guyana and Bermuda. They had the Sandwich Islands, Hawaii. They had Hong Kong and India. And I mean, it was huge. And so this was a pretty bold statement. I like to say that our founders were willing to pledge their prosperity for their posterity. They pledged their lives and their fortunes and their sacred honor.
Well, that's what they talked about. They understood that life was transitory and it was about an idea and doing something nobody had ever done before. And in England, if you challenged them in any way, they would lock you up to starve to death in the elements and then leave the skeletons up all over the place. And then after the bones collapse, they'd put a new person in there, or they'd cut your head off and put it on a spike at the London Bridge. And so later, and this is on record, I've read all these history books, this is a fact, the British would rape your wives, kill your family, or starve you to death, and just dumping thousands of bodies a month into the water. I want to tell people about the starvation ships because, I mean, this is the evil we're fighting. Go ahead.